After the Masquerade, the masks come off, using the Unmasking Diary to explore the everyday process of neurodivergent autistic unmasking. Author Natasha Stavros, Ph.D., speaks with licensed marriage and family therapist Sarah Liebman, diagnosed ADHD with special interest all things neurodiverse. Join us in this episode of Following the Threads as we explore social, psychological, and spiritual frameworks that empower resilience through change. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute counseling, psychotherapy, or mental health services. Listening to this podcast or communicating with the host and guests does not form a therapist-client relationship. The information here is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your own mental health professional with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. Welcome to Following the Threads. I'm Natasha Stavros.
And I'm Sarah Liebman.
Today's episode will be about what is autism. And I am so excited to talk about this because there's been so many articles and we've read so much about it. And I have to admit that I, like many, had lived my whole life othering autistic people. I was never mean, nor did I think of myself as more than, at least not consciously, but I certainly did not consider myself any different than neurotypical people. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually perpetuating ableism because I could mask, or at least I could until I couldn't. And I think a lot of this stems not just from my own ignorance, but in a general societal ignorance. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like I didn't know these things because I willfully refused to learn them. It was a byproduct of a society that doesn't talk about it. And if no one's talking about it, how could I have known what I didn't know? So today, I really am excited about the fact that we're talking about what autism is.
Yeah, we're both really excited about it.
Yeah, this was a hard episode to pull together, I have to admit. It was a hard one. There was a lot of reading, a lot of research that went into this one. And I want to strip away the layers of stigma and the judgment so that we can really understand what it is from a clinical, neurobiological, and practical perspective. And I don't think that while all three of those things are important, often the resources defining autism in any one of those are actually quite fragmented. Yeah. And so I'm excited that we're pulling it all together today.
Yeah. And when they're often written like more to echo the DSM and less to echo the practical, which is how many people kind of come to the notion of like, I think I need an autism assessment.
Or they're all practical and less about the DSM, like we see from a lot of social media educators on the topic. And so I think it's really great to pull them kind of all together here today. Let's first talk about the clinical. Okay. So you mentioned the DSM. We've talked about it. For those who are new to the episode, DSM stands for the Diagnostic Statistical Manual on Mental Health.
Of mental disorders, I think.
Mental disorder. And that's an important word.
It is. Disorders is very important. Yeah.
And we'll get to that in a second. So the DSM-5 is what's currently used to assess autism. There's 7 criteria, and they fall into 2 buckets: social communication and behavioral deficiencies. And then on top of that, there's 3 other things. There's the evidence that these traits were present early in development, that the traits meaningfully affect daily function, and differences are not better explained by intellectual disability or global developmental delay. Yes. So that clinically sums up the definition of autism. And last time we talked about the history and the change. Do you want to unpack any of that clinically, like as a psychotherapist who's talked with clients?
Well, I think that we spoke in an earlier episode about how when you were starting to think about getting an autism assessment, you asked me to send you the diagnostic criteria. And I know when I sent it to you and when you received it, we were both like, I don't really know. Like, how is this connected to what people are experiencing? So it's definitely still very much based on the diagnosing children model. And it's kind of alienating to a lot of adults who look at it because, on the one hand, it's very stressful when you're asked to produce a bunch of information about childhood, right? And on the other hand, it puts such a focus on the historical through line that the descriptions don't really seem to match like what it's like to function in a world that is not school. So much of this diagnostic criteria, you could, teachers are one of the people that are a reporter, and and so it's all based on that kind of school norms too. So the DSM is, it is a living document that does get, written, and I think that this moment in time, it was published in 2013, which means the work took place over a 3 to 5 year period before it was published. And so I don't know how often they update, but it'll be interesting to see if the diagnostic criteria are more inclusive of lifelong autism, not just infantile autism, as it was called at one point.
Right. Right. And we talked about that in the last episode. And there's also been a lot of connections that have been made, especially on social media, of the neurobiology.
Yes.
And autism. And one of the things that we found in researching for this episode is that while research has found correlation between autism spectrum disorder and neurobiological, i.e., brain and genetic factors, a recent review in Frontiers in Psychology shows that these studies do not sufficiently characterize the full clinical and behavioral heterogeneity. And for me, as a researcher, right, I worked for NASA. The way that we would describe this sort of more broadly scientifically would be a data sufficiency problem, where the sample size across we don't have enough data across all of the gradients of variation to actually draw the conclusions. But we also found an interesting article that was a review and a perspective piece in Frontiers in Psychology, or Psychiatry, that argues that autism science has a history of false leads, in part because of unexamined ableist ideologies that undergird researcher framings and interpretations of evidence. And that is a direct quote from the paper, which is why I wanted to get it right. So neurobiologically, there's been correlations, don't really understand the causation, at least maybe don't have enough data across all the gradients of variation that we see behaviorally.
It's heritable.
Yes.
But that doesn't actually like map it to like, oh, and then this went to that and this went to that. Yeah. And I want to just say heterogeneity, make sure that people understand that means sort of multiple, right? Because that's a word that to I think it said to capture the heterogeneity, I can't say the word, of the population, right? And I just wanted to make sure that word got a little defined.
Mm-hmm. And that relates back to what we were just talking about clinically, where you have the DSM and it represents, children, specifically boys.
Yeah.
Right?
Because there's a lot of data for that.
But now you talk about ages of boys.
Yeah.
And then you talk about, well, what if you're not a boy? What if you're a girl? Now, what if you're transgender? That's heterogeneity. As we start to talk about these different factors, we can find correlation, but we don't have enough across all those gradients to actually say, mechanistically, this is cause, or this is, where it comes from. And so it's a very correlative place.
Yeah.
So it could be a data sufficiency, but also it's around this ableist idea.
Yeah.
And so let's unpack what ableism is.
All right. Would you like for me to do that?
Yes, please.
All right. So so ableism is the idea that there is a norm that is agreed upon by all of us, and it's an objective reality. And we are all innately desiring to strive for it. And so that, creates this that creates the soup that the questions can be even thought of in, as we were just talking about, right? So if we, ableism, if you think broadly of disability, like say someone who has a mobility disability, and you look around and you see, oh, there's no curb cuts, there's the doors to the bathroom are really narrow, there's not room in here for a wheelchair. People understand ableism pretty easy when there's an external difference of ability, right? But when it comes to autism and ADHD and the combo platter of ADHD, they're not like invisible disabilities, but they are conditions that are problematic to the norm, to the notion of a norm, right? And so they have been put in the fact that it's a deficit-based study of autism and neurodiversity, and so that's the external ableism, and that same notion of there being a norm, a thing we're all striving to be, feeds into the internalized ableism, which is, if you think about yourself, and you were to make a paper doll out of yourself and label each part, there are probably parts of you that are relatively cohesive, and then other parts of you that are chopped to bits or full of ink or aren't even there anymore. And those are the parts that have not conformed to the unconscious ableist world. Like an example from my childhood is that because I could read and I could comprehend well, and I could allegedly read quite well, although there turned out to be some challenges with that, I could not produce writing, right? And so on the one hand, I had one ability that was higher than my peers, and on another, I had an ability that was much lower than my peers. And the ableist part of it, even this still happens today, it's not that you have to be in your 50s for this to have happened to you, is that one thing is used to attack why the other thing isn't happening. And so inside of me, my internalized ableism is I don't try hard enough, I don't care, I have a mental block against math, which I literally used to see as a brick wall. And so as you're unmasking, internalized ableism comes up a lot in all of the shoulds and the shame and things like that.
And sort of just that it is a personal or moral failing on your part.
You're disconnected from the world, and the ableism of the outside you don't see the connection initially. And so that's a huge part of unmasking.
And that's such a great transition to what is autism from a practical perspective. So they say autism spectrum, those people out there, they call it spectrum disorder, mm-hmm. right? And so, isn't everyone on the spectrum? And, I think in my snippet, I'll describe how I think about this as a remote sensing Earth system scientist. So, caveat this, I'm not a neuroscientist. Everyone has variation from what this idealized norm is. But really, the thing practically that makes it autism spectrum disorder is that you actually kind of go through periods where you are not able to show up and mask, or that you actually exceed your capacity and you can either melt down or shut down. And that's a whole interesting conversation about those, but that you actually become disabled from meeting
Yeah.
the norm, not that you deviate from it, but that you deviate from it and getting back to it
Right.
is.
Right. And we were talking a little earlier, not on the podcast, but earlier today about why is something a disorder and why is it not? So, like if we take the idea that there is a spectrum of human experience and ability and all of those things, when the way one does something is at odds, yes, with the outside world, but also with the inside of themselves, the level of distress that causes moves something from being difficult to being a disorder. Now, the ableism in that is that there are things that are a disorder, like, what was that one? It wasn't in the DSM, but it was like people who didn't want to be slaves, right? Oftentimes these, any criteria can really, meet the general public. But when there's a specific domain, like you have identified social communication domain as one where you can see like, oh, these are all the areas where my difference was a huge benefit to me. And then this is the one where I keep kind of going through the same difficulty and loss, right? And that's where the exceeding your own capacity to tolerate puts it in a different realm, away from difference into, I got to figure out how to do this differently.
So, okay, so that's disability sort of from a practical sense and sort of in your day to day, right? Like when it exceeds that. And I'll give an example of this is that like I honestly do not understand. I have been in multiple friendships that have ended all the exact same way. And I'm like, how? I really tried to do it differently this time. Like, I do not understand. And they continually end. And so long-term maintenance of friendships is really hard for me. It's not to say that I haven't had long-term friends. It's just that I continuously sort of hit the same wall, even though I run at it different ways every single time. Like maybe I can just alter it. And I'm actually outside of my capacity. I really, no way that I change it is really, I can't. But I think there's another element to the practical, what is autism? And that is in identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so you and I were talking about how there's a natural tension of identity and how it forms in an ableist world when you grow up in an ableist family in a world and society that supports and reinforces ableism, that your identity forms this sort of like moral failing, you're a bad person. And then the identity shift toward more of, no, I'm autistic. And it's that the environment is not supportive of me. So.
Well, I want to kind of key back into your example that you were giving, because you're right, this is a specific set of friendships formed in specific ways. And you'd said in an earlier podcast that you see now that like you would always think about your behavior and how you could change it, which would keep you from seeing the actual cruelty, danger, unkindness happening, because your ableist bias to yourself was that here is this thing that's really wrong with me and shameful, and I need to keep trying to get better at being a friend. And that was actually, it was harmful to you, right? Mm-hmm. And so in identity, prior to your autism diagnosis, the only things you had available to you were ableist ideas about yourself, right? And you were very successful in school. I was very unsuccessful, but the burden for you is that's, that's the gold standard. If you were great in academics, then you're going to be just fine, right? And, when you have this, you keep missing, right? You just keep missing, like, why is it I keep having this same kind of breakdown of friendship, right? And you don't have all the information. Your identity as a autistic person actually endangers you because you aren't able to create a cohesive identity when you don't have the information that really lets you create a safe and vital world around you. And by vital, I mean you create in the way you create. You, have relationships that, fit, all of those things, right? And so, there's often identity politics and all these other things. But I mean, I don't really think anybody can say that the data supports most people who are diagnosed as neurodivergent are mad about it in the end. No, most people are like, I'm grieving, whatever, but it forms like a whole different set of honeycombs. So your identity is like richer and deeper and less full of 2x4s whacking yourself with.
Yeah, and one thing I think you had said so nicely to me was that when you are able to disentangle neurodivergent characteristics from shame-based meanings attached to them that are rooted in ableism, you can actually shift from sort of this grounded, like this identity grounded in conformity or lack thereof as I have autism, right? Like I'm this perfect being and autism is this thing that explains why I can't be perfect.
And and it's attacking me and I need to get it off of me.
Right. To a more neurodivergent affirming identity that aligns with your lived internal experience of I am autistic.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the moment that, first of all, working with a psychotherapist can really help you in that. And I can attest to that. But this is the moment when you kind of unlock your ability to develop self-understanding, self-compassion, be able to modify your environments, renegotiate your relationships, seek accommodations and address workplace or social structures that contribute to the distress that you've been experiencing.
Yeah.
Right? And so for today, we talked about what is autism clinically, as it's defined through sort of social communication and behavioral deficiencies. We talked about its connection with neurobiology, i.e. the brain and genetics. And we talked about what is autism from a practical perspective of being disabled and the relationship that has with ableism and identity. Mm-hmm. And so with that in mind, I do want to say that, today wraps up season 1, thread 1, an introduction, the when, how, what, and why of getting an adult autism diagnosis. We will be taking a 2-week break as we transition to the next seasons, which follow the different threads of navigating a late diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and ADHD. And that's right. I said seasons, plural. Future episodes will chronologically jump between seasons as we follow the threads through my early stages of learning to unmask and embrace my adult autism diagnosis. Don't miss our next episodes. Subscribe now. These next seasons invite some of your favorite educational content creators and pedagogical influencers, as well as academics in adult neurodivergence onto the show to follow these threads. Please like, share, or comment. We look forward to getting to know you.
All right. See you next time.
This episode of Following the Threads is inspired by the Unmasking Diary, snippets from the book After the Masquerade, a memoir by Natasha Stavros. The Unmasking Autism Diary, memoir excerpt on autism beyond the DSM, identity, science, and the spectrum. My therapist asked me if I knew what autism is. Here is what I said. But first, you must know who I am so that you can understand my perspective. I am not a psychologist, a psychotherapist, nor a neuroscientist. I did get a Ph.D. in quantitative forest ecology as the first person to quantify extreme fire events under climate change. I have a bachelor's in mathematics, which had the oh-so-very big graduating class of about 30 people at an R1 university with over 30,000 students. Later, I did a postdoc at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, California Institute of Technology. Over the last 6 years, I have written a book on science, innovation, leadership, and systematically changing broken systems. Sidebar: subscribers get updates on the book launch, and Substack paid subscribers get an early autographed hardback copy of the book. My understanding of autism comes from lived experience or from reading other people's research and educational content as a researcher and scientist myself. I do have deep knowledge of science, measurement, mathematics, and systems. In science, there are a few things that we can measure: time, length, mass, electric current, thermodynamic temperature, amount, luminous intensity, and electromagnetic energy. In remote sensing, my background of research, we measure either the electromagnetic energy of particles or the collective vibration of atoms. Most of my work focused on measuring energy, radiated and emitted across the electromagnetic spectrum. The electromagnetic spectrum spans radio waves to gamma waves. My area of focus extended just beyond visible light into the shortwave, mid, and longwave infrared. For simplicity, let's use only the visible part of the spectrum. This is a rainbow. Imagine that everything you look at has a rainbow associated with it. That rainbow represents the unique characteristics of it. For example, the rainbow of a pine tree represents its water content, health, bark to leaf ratio, etc. Now, if we took all the pine trees and averaged their rainbows together, we would expect that whenever we saw a rainbow that looked like that, it could very likely be a pine tree. But what happens when a pine tree has to live in harsh conditions, on the side of a cliff, and it is in nutrient-poor soil with harsh winds? Its roots may be more present, and it may have skewed nutrient representation, both affecting that pine tree's rainbow. Autism is like this. If we were to imagine that everyone's brain function was a rainbow, it is not a leap to imagine how we build our society and our systems with the average rainbow in mind. But someone who is autistic has a rainbow that doesn't quite look like average. Technically, everyone's rainbow differs from average, but it's the amount of variation in your unique rainbow that determines how much energy it takes to comply with the average assumptions. When the needed energy to comply exceeds your capacity, that's when you become, quote, disabled and require more support to comply. Does everyone have a unique rainbow that differs from average? Yes. Does everyone need support to function within the unimodal assumption of normalcy? No. What autism, ADHD, and ADHD tell us is that there are persistent patterns in those rainbows of brain function. Enough so that brain function is not a unimodal distribution. Brain function is a multimodal distribution, and we can map those patterns of difference in brain function to human behavior. And that's what we see when we look at what autism is in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Health. By classifying neurodivergent people as disabled, we inherently prioritize one way of living and penalize people for deviating from the average rainbow. This perpetuates ableism and supremacy, the idea that average brain function is a supreme way of being, when in reality, unique rainbows can harness immense creativity and exceptional ability. This text is a snippet from my next book, After the Masquerade. For early access to the book and other resources, upgrade to a paid subscription via Substack at natashastavros.substack.com. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Following the Threads. I'm Natasha Stavros, co-host and executive producer, here with Sarah Liebman, co-host, Linda Highfield, director, and Noah Smith, audio engineer and composer.